So most people don't realize that there are all these niches of aviation, and each one requires a kind of a different personality set. So, you know, I flew air ambulance, and it definitely requires somebody who can jump out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning and it's 20 below zero, and you are pretty much on your own. From the moment, you know, dispatch calls and says you have this flight, they kind of tell you where you're going, and from that point on, you are in charge of your flight planning, making sure your passengers get on the airplane at night with all the security. It's difficult sometimes to get doors open. So you have to have a lot of patience for it. Flying charter and flying C-suite clients that are kind of prima donnas, and they want you to cut the crust off of their peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. You have to have a lot of patience for that, and flexibility, and being able to, the old cliche of think outside the box. I can't tell you how many times we'll be flying along someplace and all of a sudden somebody taps me on the shoulder and they say, well, we'd actually like to go to this destination instead of where we're going. So you have to be able to just calmly accept those changes and, you know, work towards getting that goal completed. Flying cargo, if you make a career out of flying cargo, it's a little different personality type too. You don't have to deal with the passengers. A lot to be said about that. A lot of long distance, long haul flying. Most of my cargo friends, they sometimes do around the world trips, and then they come back and they have a long stretch of days off. So what makes you happy now might be different later when you have a family, or you have other obligations. Just be aware that there's different flexibility within the industry itself. Just keep that in the back of your mind. Another thing that I'm noticing right now during the COVID issue is there's a lot of flight departments that they will sell their pilots to other flight departments. So I worked for a charter company, and then when we were quiet, and other companies would call mine and say, hey, do you have a citation first officer? Do you have a citation captain? So even if a company is quiet, there are some of them that coordinate and collaborate with pilot services. So if you're wanting lots of hours, you know, those are things to be thinking about when you're inquiring about working at a company. Do they do those types of things, and is that something that you want to do? Because some of them will fly you every single day up to the very maximum that they possibly can. Fire bomber pilots, I've never tried it, but another niche in the industry that they're always looking for pilots. And of course, seaplane pilots, bush pilots. I just saw my perfect retirement job. They were flying island hopping down in the Bahamas in a seaplane. I thought that would be a great job to finish up in. So I just want to quick make a comment about you know, that first job and trying to get in there, and you're wondering how do you get those hours. One of the things that exists out there, especially in the air ambulance world, is even though a King Air doesn't require 2 pilots, it's not a type-rated airplane, you don't have to have somebody in the right seat, but a company will have operating specifications, which is an agreement with the FAA and how they're going to operate. And sometimes the FAA and the company agree that they always have to have a person in the right seat. So that's how I was able to get my first paying job, is at an air ambulance company that had a requirement that they needed somebody in the right seat. So then you can legally log that time, get paid for it, not a whole lot, but still building up turbine twin time is an amazing thing to do, and that's one way to do it. And another thing that one of my students pointed out the other day is there's a lot of single engine airlines, even like Boutique Air is here in Denver. It's a single engine turbine airline company. There's also some island hopping out in Hawaii. So if you're willing to be flexible earlier in your career and go someplace like that, there's opportunities to get a job with a little bit less time. And I just wanted to show you what the inside of a very nice air ambulance looks like. Ours didn't look this nice, but just wanted to show you some of their options. So the shortest job I ever had was, I had been working for a charter company for many years, and at that company, one of the biggest barriers I ever had was ironically because of a woman. So I'd worked at Elliott for many years and had a good client base for my charter companies. And across the field, they had a growing big company, charter, air ambulance, everything. And the owner kept trying to lure me over. And I finally said, okay, I'll go. So she promised that I'd be flying more, but the caveat was that I still had to work in the charter office and the front desk and doing office duties. So the agreement was I'd come over, do my office duties, and then gradually work into flying. So after 6 months, I still hadn't flown a flight. And so I finally went in her office one day and said, okay, I left my other job to come work here and I haven't flown. I'm now out of currency. What is going on? And surprisingly, she looked me in the eye and said, I don't think our corporate clients would be willing to have a woman fly them around. So, you know, of course, I was heartbroken because I had left my flying job to come here, and now all of a sudden I wasn't going to be able to fly. So, you know, I still needed a job. So, you know, I was very unhappy. I'm trying to figure out a way to make this happen. So I hustled as much as I could, and I purposely overbooked our charter department over a couple weeks time span. And I knew that we were running low on pilots. So the chief pilot had been an advocate for me. He was, you know, I had more time than most of the pilots walking in the door, getting hired, and I was ready to go. And so finally, they got to the point where they just didn't have enough pilots, and she finally said, fine, go get Karen, go get some training real quick, we'll get you on our weekend schedule to start flying. So fortunately for me, my very first flight, the passengers I had wrote a note to my boss saying what a wonderful trip they had, and that they requested me for their next flight. So for me, it was just one tipping point, and just having that perspective changed around for her to see that I can do just as good a job as anybody else here. So it just took that moment to change it. And from that point on, I continued to grow my flight time and eventually moved out of the office and worked full time into the cockpit. But just an example of, you know, I think what all of you are going to face is just that perspective and getting people used to seeing women up there so that it's not a big deal. It takes time and a generation or two to change that perspective, and we're getting there, and you guys are all helping do it, so just keep the momentum going. But after working at that company for a few years, I was lured over to another job, flying full-time on a citation, and they were doing international flying. So that was my next step. I wanted to do a little longer range flying. So I got hired at a company at Minneapolis, and they sent me to training, and I did all the emergency procedures. I had to go jump in a pool and learn how to turn the raft over and do all those horrible things. And I was waiting for my first trip and my first phone call. They called me up a couple weeks later and they said, guess what? We just sold the airplane. You no longer have a job. Just like that, I was out of a job. So welcome to aviation. There's lots of twists and turns in it. But thankfully that happened because I turned in my application to Northwest Airlines, and their division of 727s was called Champion Air. They flew sports teams. We did the DoD contracts. We did the normal mainline flying too, you know, Detroit, St. Louis, Vegas. But it was a mix. So we did a charter flights with the 727. So like I was saying, after all those years of flying, I got hired at the airlines, and then I didn't get to fly. So this is the flight engineers panel. It's not the whole panel, it's just a portion of it. But this is where my passion for systems grew and, you know, started. So the flight engineer sits back there and runs all the systems on the airplane and makes the flight attendants too hot and then too cold. And but I got to watch this fabulous coordination of crew resource management. And when it worked really well, it was just amazing to watch the process and the use of checklists and the flow, and how we can take a complex airplane like this and just, you know, do 5 and 6 legs a day and get passengers in and out. And it was just an amazing process. That's just what the paint job looked like on there. And there's still 727s flying. I know somebody that just got typed just, you know, 8 weeks ago. So there's a couple of them flying out there. One of them flies horses around. The rest of them, I think, went up to Canada. A lot of them go overseas after they reach up to their level D maintenance checks. So that's my very first red-eye flight, is that middle picture. My roommates thought it was funny to see how tired I was. We had a departure, I think, out of it was Vegas, that left every night at 1:50 in the morning. So of course the junior person gets to fly that one. So they took my picture there. And then the picture on the far right, on my far right, that gal in the right seat, she actually was my very first private pilot flight instructor. So here I was, I never knew another pilot, a woman pilot, and I walk into a flight school and they actually had one of their very first female flight instructors. So Kip in the right seat there, she was my flight instructor, and then we kind of lost touch, and 8 years later, she walks in the cockpit of the airplane and I'm her captain. So a good lesson to never burn a bridge, and that your flight instructor one day may be your first officer. So